After I was asked to consider speaking here today, it just floated to the top. It had a buoyancy to it that I knew that I needed to kind of frame this talk around. And so it's something that's a little different than what I'm used to presenting about, because I'm used to talking about tangibles of grazing and management practices. So I want to share that with you. Let me get this clicker. Going. My one slide. There you go. So it goes like this. We have the world to live in on the condition that we will take good care of it. And to take good care of it, we have to know it. And to know it and be willing to take care of it, we have to love it. So it's easy to read that. It meant so much to me. We have a big, giant whiteboard in our main shop, and I wrote it at the top of that. And it's kind of become a motto for us to remember whenever we're doing all the daily grind work, to look up there and remember that it's about loving and knowing. But it's easy, even whenever you've admired this quote for a number of years, to read the first sentence and go, we have this world to live in on the condition that we can take care of it. It's easy to try and take care of things. Pragmatics. There's 150 books on how to be a better husband or how to be a better friend. But you can't apply pragmatics to something without knowing it and be successful. So as Kaylin and I discussed this quote and tried to kind of dissect it and get ready to do this talk, Kaylin brought this point up, and I thought it was really great. To read this kind of in reverse. And so what Barry is trying to communicate to us is that love has to be first. And that love will drive a desire and an ability to know. And then knowing then allows us to have the wisdom to take good care. And so for the next few minutes, I want to go through our story of our farm and the journey that we've been on this last decade. And hopefully through that, you'll be able to see the difference that loving and knowing makes in being able to take care of the land and this entire planet that we all share. And maybe in the end, we'll be able to answer some of those questions that I asked about how we can continue this movement. So let me get a drink real quick. Excuse me. My great-grandfather moved the family to the Blackland Prairie at the turn of the 20th century. He was a sharecropper. They had a small piece of land that they were able to work and take care of. They were sustenance farmers. They lived off of the land. They relied on the land. There was a relationship there that literally meant survival or death. There was an intimacy. So as my grandfather came on in that family farm, this would probably have been around the 1930s or 40s, he was able to purchase some of that land and then farm in the way that they did, which was a diversified farm. They had crops, they had diversified livestock. They too lived off of the land. They harvested the animals and they shared some of that with their neighbors. I hear these stories from my dad often when he reflects fondly on the lifestyle that they had in that community. And he tells me of all the houses and the households that used to be there represented on the land. Somewhere at the latter part of my grandfather's tenure as the main manager on the farm and my dad taking over, we came into the post-war era, and Will described it earlier. Many of you have lived it. That I'm not saying that many of you are that old. I'm saying many of you have lived the same story. So the experts told them, farm fence row to fence row. It's all about pushing the yields, maximizing profits, get big or get out. And that's what happened to our community. Not everybody could get big, so most of them got out. We were some of the lucky ones. We were able to get big, and we were able to stay there. But this is a common thread. If you want to read the details about it, get Barry's book, The Unsettling of America, because it is a script of what happened on our farm, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So naturally, growing up on this farm as a fourth generation, I inherited a fondness for the land by simply being there and being raised on it. But by the time I graduated from high school, I had no ambition or desire to stay on the farm simply because there was no room for me on the farm. My dad wasn't really making a living. How was I supposed to make a living there? Along with that, all the school counselors told the kids from the rural areas, you need to go to college, and you need to go somewhere else, and you need to make something of yourself. So that's what we did. I went to college, I got a business degree, got married, and we lived in the city, and we worked in the business world for a while. One harvest, Dad was short on some labor. He needed extra help, so I went back home, helped him with harvest, and that kind of stirred some romantic notions, I think, in me, some nostalgia of early childhood growing up. Mom was there at the farm, all the family was there, the people that worked for us, and we had dinners on the turn rows. We would flip the tailgate down. We would watch the sunset at the end of a hard-working day and share that together as a community. Those were the things that kind of got stirred in me. So I went back to the city, talked to Kaylin, and we said, my dad's getting older. You can't get into that business model unless you inherit it, really. We weren't going to have the millions of dollars that was required to buy all that equipment. So we decided to move back. We moved back in 2007, and I began farming with my dad. We were farming the latest and greatest technologies that industrialized agriculture had to offer. We were farming just about 3,000 acres together. And what I found there whenever I got back was not anything like the romantic notions that I had remembered of the community and our family. What I found there was lots of lonely times in a tractor, piloting this machine over the land, trying to get across it as fast as we could because our windows were small when the weather was proper, and we had to get across lots and lots of acres to be able to justify and spread our cost over the expensive machinery. So I had searched for that old friend that I wanted to find whenever I came back, and he was nowhere to be found. Our farm, in the sake of progress, had progressed into a well-oiled industrialized machine of inputs and outputs. Again, Wendell Berry puts it very eloquently when he writes, "Mechanical farming makes it easy to think mechanically about the land and its creatures. It makes it easy to think mechanically even about oneself. And the tirelessness of tractors brought a new depth of weariness into human experience at the cost to health and family life that has not been fully accounted." So indeed, when our minds were mechanical, our decision-making process was limited to mechanical thoughts. And so what are the things that factories and economies are looking for? They're looking for efficiency, speed, productivity. So our farm was about tweaking the factory, tweaking the moving parts, trying to have a bigger machine that was more efficient, putting fertilizer exactly 1 inch off of where the root might be. All of these things we were doing every year, reinventing the wheel, it seemed, and tweaking it. And that reminds me of a quote that Trey Cates gave in a talk at the Grass-Fed Exchange a couple of years ago about industrialization. It was all about doing things right instead of doing the right things. And that's a short quote, but I think it's very poignant. We were trying to do things right all the time and trying to change that, but we weren't doing the right things. We were focused on symptoms, and we weren't asking the right questions. We didn't even know that we were supposed to be asking questions. We had no idea. This came at a great cost to my family. My parents sacrificed a lot to be able to afford to go into deep, deep debt for these machines and to be able to try and be economical and farm enough acres to justify the machines. But if you farm a little bit more, we needed another tractor, and then you go on and on and on. So in essence, what we were doing is we were trying to take an industrialized model and apply it to a dynamic living ecosystem. And those two things aren't congruent. That took a toll on the identity of that land. That land's been scarred for 150 years, maybe beyond the repair of back to what it was. We like to think that it's going to get better than what it was, and we're working towards that. It took its toll on the community that I never really lived in, but my dad lived in and my grandfather lived in. There were at least 8 houses that represented households that are on the land that we currently farm, which is a lot less than what we were farming at the time. Those were households that raised families, that farmed about 100 acres each. So, maybe less. My math was off there. Anyways, you get the picture. There's lots of falling down houses that represent lives and community that used to be there. That was broken. Our family was not there anymore. My mom worked in town. My wife worked in town. My siblings were not on the farm. Dad and I were there alone, and we had no relationship with the land. We didn't really have a great relationship with each other because we were in the way of efficiencies. So what industrialization had done was remove the need for the human element, and it really made us obsolete on the farm. Speed and efficiency as your number one goals inherently cause you to resent the things that get in the way of speed and efficiency. And so being able to slow down was really not an option. Being able to be a little bit less efficient was really not an option. But we were doing the best that we knew how. We were doing the best that the universities at first, and then the agronomists from the seed companies told us. This was the world we lived in. This was the only thing that we were exposed to. We didn't know the land. We were reductionist, and we didn't see any problems. We needed something to help us peel the scales off of our eyes and see differently. I'm reminded of a quote that early on I heard Gabe Brown say that impacted him. It was from Don Campbell, an HMI practitioner. And I'll paraphrase it because I don't have it in my notes, but it basically was, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make big, impactful changes, change the way you see things. And that really hit me the first time I heard Gabe, and it's really true. We needed to see. So, one redeeming factor of being trapped in a glass box for long hours that's embellished in John Deere green is that you can listen to a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of time in there to listen to audible books and podcasts. And so during the time that I spent in those tractors, which oftentimes during the busy seasons were 15-hour days easily. I think 19 hours was my record in that cab. But I was listening to lots of podcasts, but this one in particular, I think it was about 2009 that I heard this. It was called Can Faith Be Green? And this podcast really opened my eyes to the way I saw the world from a theological perspective, really. But it caused me to see that we humans, we have a duty and a responsibility to take care of the environment and to restore it and to redeem it. And I never had thought of it that way before. It was just a means to an end, really. It was a tool that we used to make a profit or make a living. So for the very first time, some affections were stirred for the land, that it needed to be cared for, it needed to be nurtured and stewarded. And we first started to see that we needed to help it thrive, and not just ask it what it can give to us. But this created a tension. It created a problem for me and for Kaylin because we didn't know any other way to farm. So now our farming was at odds with what we believed, and every time I had to go climb up into the tractor with a boom half as wide as this room and drive it 20 miles an hour, I could kill things at a rate of 180 acres per hour, you don't have much time to think about what you're doing. And that tore at me, and it began to tear at me more and more the more I listened to things and read things. So how was that going to be reconciled? We had no hope for that. There was no way to reconcile agriculture with how we saw the world. So now we're in 2011. The winter had been very dry, and so dry that all the farmers in the area decided to wait and not plant their crops. Usually that's in late February, early March, when the corn planters start to roll. Everybody was waiting for a rain to see, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and it never came. And the temperatures got in the triple digits, and it seems like they stayed there the entire year. And it really was like this, what's going to happen? The world's coming to an end. It was bad. You heard Deborah talk about it earlier. What that did, though, even to our ignorant minds, was expose the brokenness of what I now know to call the ecosystem functions. It was very broken ecologically. The system was broken financially. We kind of knew that by 2011, coming out of the business world, that this business model was not supporting two families, even at 3,000 acres. Socially, it was broken. People were very stressed. People were having to leave their farms. And so towards the end of that year, I think it was late summer, I don't know, it took me 2 months really to work up the courage to sit down with my dad. I've been doing this talk for like 5 years and it still gets me, so I'm sorry. When there's been 3 generations on the land, and you sit there and you have to tell your dad he's going to be the end, obviously it's very hard. That was hard. It really was, to tell him that it was going to die with him, because he had already been on that roller coaster. We were gone, but we came back, so it was like, things are going to be great, I'm going to pass it down, and this is going to continue. But that didn't work, and that hope was faded. And so that was very difficult. But Kaylin and I had decided to leave the farm. We really didn't have a choice or a desire at that point to continue on there. But thankfully, the housing market was not great at that time, and so our house sat on the market and didn't sell, and we didn't move to Austin like we had planned. During that time, NRCS was having a meeting, and they invited my dad and I up there. I didn't really want to go. I thought it was just going to be some more junk about some magic bullets and things like that. But that day changed my life. That day, Ray Archuleta was there. Now I've got all the juices flowing. Yeah, Ray's a great friend. And he spoke about this idea of regenerative agriculture that I had never heard about. I had never, ever heard that concept. And it was captivating to me. He showed examples of Gabe Brown and David Brandt, who had been doing this. So it wasn't just some government employee with a bright idea and a theory that hadn't been tested on anything bigger than a 10 by 10 plot. This was real life stuff that he was giving examples of. So by lunch, I was wrestling, and I knew deep down this was something compelling that I needed to be a part of. But if I have to narrow that talk of Ray's down to what it gave me, it gave me hope. It gave me hope that there was something that we could do that lined up with our new worldview and the way that we saw the world around us. So the pieces started coming together. Kaylin and I slept on that. I wasn't going to put my dad through saying we're going to stay and then we're going to leave again. So we slept on that, prayed about it for a while, and then I talked to Dad and told him we do want to stay, to be a part of this, but not interested in continuing on the status quo. Thankfully, the environment was right for him to I mean, we were leaving, so it was kind of a perfect storm. But thankfully, he was good with it. And gosh, I think within less than a month, we had sold all of our tillage equipment and planted wheat that fall because we had gotten some rain, and off we went into the world of growing cover crops and changing the row cropping. So I did what many of you have done and maybe are doing right now. I attended conferences. I attended field days. I bugged mentors that would let me, and I'm grateful for them. I read the books that they suggested that I read. I dove in completely, jumped down the rabbit hole into learning what I could about this new system, this new method of farming. But we still didn't know the land. I can remember when we first were introduced to holistic management, and many of you can relate to this. You go to your first holistic management meeting and somebody's giving an example about things and you're like, wow, this is really great what they're doing. And you go, how big do I make my paddocks? And they say, it depends. And how many animals should I put in that paddock? It depends. And the answer is always, it depends. And that's true. It really is true. It depends. It would be like somebody trying to tell me how to love my wife well without knowing my wife. It depends. So you have to know the subject of your affection. You can see how stark a contrast that is to the model that we had before. Before it was, here's what you do. You either plow your field or you spray your field. You plant this many pounds. You put this many pounds of fertilizer. You hope it rains. When it doesn't, you get your insurance check. Wash, repeat. Same thing over and over without knowing it. We started to learn that unique decision making is for unique places. And each of our places are unique. And each piece of our places are unique. So at first, in this new model, we thought we would just still be row crop farming, and we'd do it differently. We thought we would stop tilling, we would use cover crops, we would start trying to diversify our rotations, we would start reducing our chemical use, reducing our fertilizer use, following those methods, which are good, and there's a lot of great people that are going down that route. But our land was trying to tell us something. We live in Central Texas where we really don't have winter. And the guys that, Gabe has winter, those guys, and even Dave in Ohio, they would plant a cover crop and most of it would winter kill. And that's a different management where it doesn't die. And so we planted cover crops, they grew a lot and that was great. They grew all winter, but we had to kill them somehow. So we had to use herbicide or tillage, which were things that the more we learned about ecology and the biology and all of the things that we were trying to build, we were taking one step forward and 2 steps back, really. And when Kaylin and I would walk the roads of the fields, we would think, man, is there a way we can do this? Because it seems like we're wasting so much energy. Everything wants to grow. So what our land was telling us is that it wanted to grow loads of diverse plants, and it wanted to keep growing them. And so we were wasting energy indeed. Thankfully, we started to learn the language, and we started to listen. Thanks to learning how to make decisions slowly and holistically, and thanks to the courage that we got from so many mentors and great people that we met at conferences like this. Our land was telling us that it wanted to grow things, so we said, can we be all pasture-based? Can we stop row crop farming? And we decided to give it a go. In 2015, we stopped row crop farming. We didn't plant anything, so we sold some of that kind of equipment. We sold the combine, went all in, and we had blank canvases. We didn't have any perennials. We had just farm fields, and cover crops are great to graze, but they're expensive if that's your only forage. Another thing that we started to learn as our biology got ramping up is that it was really hard in our environment to keep anything on the soil to cover the ground. So we might grow 20,000 pounds of dry matter in the summer, and by late January, you couldn't tell what was out there. It was worm castings. That's great for soil health, but then we started losing one of the parts of soil health, the coverage of the ground. So we were like, gosh, we've got to change. We've got to get perennials going. And so as we started to learn that and make plans to get perennials and plans to change, we started having a lot of forbs grow. And so we had to listen again and say, what likes to eat forbs? Sheep do. And so being from Texas, we had integrated livestock. I got a little out of place there. That was part of the deal too, from learning from Gabe, was integrating livestock with the cropping. So we had brought cattle in. Our soil structure was improving, but when it's bare and there's no armor on it or there's no perennial root mass there, cows are heavy, and the Blackland Prairie is very heavy clay, and sometimes we can get 5 inches or 10 inches overnight, and that turns into a mess. So sheep fit that. They also love to eat the forbs, and so we decided to move the balance of our livestock to sheep, and that's what we're currently doing. Knowing the land helps you match your enterprises with the land as well. So I mentioned the cattle we had brought back. When we did that, we decided to start a new business with my sister and her husband, where we direct marketed the grass-finished beef. When we added the sheep, we marketed that. We had pigs, and we marketed that, again, following some of our mentors. What this did was bring the family back to the farm. So now, my parents live on the farm. My sister and her family live on the farm. My wife's parents live on the farm. We live on the farm. The community started to piece back together. There's more life. All of this takes sacrifice. It takes time for the land to heal. It takes time to build new businesses. It takes giving up short-term gains often for the long term. It's not all rainbows and easy stories. But in making those decisions, they must be rooted in an appreciation and a respect for the end goal. Aldo Leopold said, "When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. That land is a community. That land as a community is the basic concept of ecology. But that land is to be loved and respected is an extension of ethics. That land yields a cultural harvest is a fact long known, but laterally often forgotten." So what are some of the ethics of loving a place, of love? I think some of those ethics are to slow down. We're so busy all the time. We've got to slow down, observe, listen, communicate, and respond to each other, whether this be the social aspect of your family or your neighbors or your land. We have to admit our mistakes to one another, including our land. We make so many mistakes, and that's okay. But if we communicate and we respond, that's how we heal and get to know it. That's true husbandry. We have to think, and I would encourage you guys to make lists. What stirs your affections for your land? What stirs your affections for your friends, your spouses, your community? Make lists of that, because it's often easy to get down in the weeds of everyday life, and you're moving fences, you're doing this, you're keeping your head above water, and you forget why you live there. You forget why you love the place that you are. You forget why you love your family. So stir your affections. And those affections, they make you want to know things. They make you want to know how to help the land, help your spouse. Go on pasture walks instead of watching TV. Learn the land, learn where your low spots are, learn where this plant community is and that plant community, and why the things you desire are here and they're not there. See your flocks and your herds and your microorganisms as co-laborers in rebuilding and regenerating your land. Be aware of the needs so that you can take good care. All of these things, I think, will build your passion. We all make sacrifices, but these passions are what are going to get us out of bed in the morning. So how will we keep going in the long term? How will we repair the broken things? As we learn to love and appreciate the world that we live in, that will grow a desire and an ability to know it. And from knowing it, we will culture a wisdom of how to take good care of it. Remember that it's first love and not just trying to take care of something. Because if we're just trying to take care of something that we don't understand and we don't know, it gets very frustrating and it can burn us out. This cycle of loving and knowing and desiring to learn it and know it and take good care of it loops back. Because the more that we love it and the more that we know it and the more that we take good care of it, the feedback loop is that we love it more and we want to know it more and we want to take better care of it. It truly is a feedback loop, and I believe it truly is regenerative. Thanks. Oh, Aldo. Yes, ma'am. Aldo, A-L-D-O, Leopold. Yes. Sure. I don't know that it was so much that he wasn't going to agree with it. I mean, there was a little bit of that because it was kind of crazy ideas. Thankfully, he was at that meeting and he heard Ray's presentation and he saw the same things that I did. And so he was exposed to it. It wasn't me trying to regurgitate that ignorantly, but yeah, I know it can be, the family dynamics are very, very difficult. There's been some things with another sibling and some cousins and things like that, you know, where, and not only family, but the entire community that you live in, you're, you know, pretty quickly, we weren't farmers anymore in that world, and we were ruining the land. You know, we were letting it grow up in weeds, and it was good farmland. And so you kind of become ostracized at times. So it's not easy. But it's worth it. So I guess that would be what I would say. It's worth working up the courage and saying what you believe in, and they'll be convinced. Yeah. Yes.
Do you want any converts in your greater community?
How far is the great? She asked if we want any converts in our greater community. How many miles?
10 miles, 15 miles.
Yeah, there's a slowly growing community, mostly grazers. Got one row cropper that's using some of these methods, but yeah, very, very slow to adapt. We live in a very high tillage, high input, not forward-thinking area, but yeah, so not many would be the answer. Really close, but that's not untypical, unfortunately. So, anybody else? Yes. No, Can Faith Be Green by Dr. Timothy Keller from New York City. Yeah. If you're a Christian, I highly recommend it to you. Yes?
Yeah, it's regarding things like the podcast. When you went to Ray's talk, obviously there were other farmers there. What do you think in terms of communities like this that we all collectively can do to what I call prime more farmers? Because it sounds like you were primed to and ready to hear this message. And if you had heard it 3 or 4 years or 5 years prior, before you had been on your podcast and listening to that stuff, it might not have stuck. It might have just passed through. So what would you recommend the collective of this movement can do to prime more farmers? Not saying that there's anything wrong with where they're at or whatever, but giving them more access to things like the podcast and that type of learning that they can do.
Yeah. Great. Excellent question. I'll say something that would be very unpopular in another room, but I think talking to your politicians and getting rid of the things that support those types of agriculture that make it blind, so changing the farm plan would be a really good way to do that, because it removes the crutch and makes you realize that you're crippled. And it's not, and maybe it's realizing that you're crippled that was the primer for us. So that's a hard one, and it maybe not be an answer for everybody to go tell them that they're doing wrong. That's not the answer. I guess the answer in an interpersonal communication way would just be get to know them. They may be farming differently than you, but I think we can't, polarize like so much of the society right now. I mean, get to know them and try to just keep pounding on them and show them a good example of all this thriving stuff. Have them over for a barbecue and let them see all the thriving life on your farm and talk to them. So, yeah.
I wonder, what does your banker think of your change?
Well, we don't see a banker very often.
Well, doesn't he complain to his old buddies that this guy's not a very good customer anymore?
Probably so. I mean, I graduated with the one loan officer that we use because we did buy a neighboring farm back in 2013, and that's the only debt. So that's a good point. I mean, we haven't since 2014 we haven't gone into any debt for operating loans or anything like that. So that's a big step and a big win. So yeah, I don't know any bankers.
Jonathan, to your comment about talking to your politicians, when I've spoken to them, I hear, how can you make food more affordable? I say, how can you make food healthier? And I think that differential, that understanding cheap food is already too cheap.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable
Yeah.
in this better food system.
Yeah. Excellent point. See what I mean? We all bring stuff to the table. So collectively, we'll find the answers to that. I mean, we'll keep pounding away at that because there's so much brokenness in the system. Will spoke to it earlier, that it's not necessarily that the grocery stores don't want to support them. The system is set up to make that wrong. And I don't know the answer to rebuilding the food system, but we got to keep pecking away at it. Anybody else?
I
Or are
should
we
say
done?
that's time, so we
Good.
can move on. So hopefully keep the conversation going. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.